All right, so this is cool. This is one of the best things about Procreate is you could just create your own brushes if you can't find exactly what you're looking for. And a lot of creativity can be poured into these brushes and what you want them to do. So with our brush palette open, how do we create a new brush? Well, there is a plus button in the upper right hand corner, very similar to how the layer palette works. We go ahead and click that, and we have at the top an untitled brush. So if I go ahead and tap on that, I can name this anything. So I'll name this Brad's Brush 21 because I'm sure I already have 20 others in here. There we go, 21. So I can name it. I can pull that down. And every brush is going to have some kind of source to it, a shape source. So for example, I can insert a photo. I can take a photo of a texture if I want to. And if I tap on insert photo, it's going to take me to my photos. And I can use this as a texture for one of my brushes. It's actually easier and probably worth playing around for your first couple brushes to go here, swap from Pro Library. One of the really cool things that Procreate does for you is they actually have a slew of brushes in here, or a slew of textures in here already that you can use. I mean, take a look at all the stuff that is in here. Whoops, I actually tapped out of that. Let me go back. There's a lot in here. So I can grab any of these. I can grab my Chinese ink texture. I can invert that shape, or I can swap it out for something else. I can also go down here and grab my grain source. So let's go to swap from photo library. Let's find a nice texture that will work for us. Something like short hair might be a good texture. Sketch paper might be a good texture. Let's try this one. This canvas is a very good texture. So there we go. Once we have that going for us, it has brought all this together for us, and it has set up our brush. It didn't carry over the name, so I'm going to name this Brad's Brush one more time, 21. And let's go over some of these advanced brush settings. So it immediately takes you to the grain settings of your brush. And if we scroll down movement, it's going to blur that more as we draw, or it's just going to bring out more of that texture. So as I draw, you're going to see that texture underneath a little bit more. If I pull it down, let me pull that down really quick. You're going to see less of that texture and more of that blur. We can also change the scale of those things. Let's move the movement all the way back up. And I could change the scale of that texture so you can actually see me zooming in on that texture if I want more of it, if I want it more detailed. Zoom is a very similar thing. We could also rotate the texture, which blurs it out a little bit, but makes it less pronounced, which is kind of cool. And then down along the bottom, we have a lot of options. For example, we have a stroke option. If we want to change the spacing of that shape, we could do that. If we pull it all the way down, you can actually see the brush. That's why I like to keep it kind of around there. We can streamline it, which I talked a little bit about earlier. This is going to add or take away a little bit of the jitter. It's kind of like a line smoother. If you have jittery hands, the brush is going to have a smoother stroke to it. There's jittering of the shape, which is actually going to add some randomness to the shape, which is kind of cool. I like to add a little bit of jitter. As you can see, if you add too much, it's going to be kind of this spacey thing. If you want to do like a snowflake pattern, that could be really neat. But I think if you want kind of a standard brush, you probably want to hold it down here. But I like to jitter it a little bit because it adds a little chaos. Now fall off, on the other hand, you lose ink as you paint. Now if you think about it, if you dip your brush like in watercolor or something and you go, your brush is going to get drier. Some of that paint is going to come out as you kind of lay it down. And that's what's happening when you increase the fallout like that. So I like to keep that up because that's cool. Or I like to keep it down, I should say. Then there's stroke taper. This comes in handy if you have an Apple Pencil. You could, at the beginning of the end, you can taper your stroke based on the amount of pressure you apply with your pen. So there we go. Let's see what else we have here. We can, of course, change the opacity of these things, the size of it. Over here we have our shapes section, which has more things. We can rotate that pattern. We can scatter it a little bit more and rough up the edges. I'm going to skip over grain and go to dynamics. This is for brushes if you don't have an Apple Pencil, but you want it to make it appear like you have some kind of pressure control to it. So I don't use this too much. So if you go faster, maybe you get a thick line or a thinner line if you go faster, that sort of thing. I don't really use it too much. Next up we have pencil. So this applies specifically to our Apple Pencil. So if we want to add some tilt to it, like if we want to use the side of the pencil, we can do that here. We have the pressure, so if we want the opacity to change with our pressure, we can adjust that here. Next up we have general, which these are just more settings in here. We've got size limits, opacity limits, things like that. And then we lastly have our source. So if we want to swap out the source on any brushes that already exist, we can do that here as well. So that, in a nutshell, is how you make a brush. And it's definitely worth kind of playing around with it and trying it out and seeing what you can create. And of course, once you've created it, it undergoes the same effects with the transparency and with the size of all your other brushes. So go ahead, play with the brushes, and have fun with those. In the next section, I'm going to talk about importing and exporting brushes from Procreate.